I'm republishing a poetry collection that I wrote. It was put out in 2017, and it's a collection of all the poetry I had written through the decades up to that point. I was like 48 or something like that. And I've been writing poetry since high school. I've been writing fiction since I was 7 years old, but poetry since high school. And then just off and on. And so it was never very many poems, but we gathered them all up, and I sent the manuscript to a friend, and he sent the manuscript to another friend, and it ended up being published. And then it had to be republished later on with Mary's art when we found high-resing software to run by an AI to super res her art. So I've included her art in here, and it is very high res. It looks, I don't think you can get it any better than what the AI, the AIs are amazing. And we're doing a class on the mythology of AI starting next week. We're going to start with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then just go from there. All right, these things we no longer are. And here I've done some stylistic things to give it the sense of a junk heap detritus, because these are things these are transcendental signifieds now that we have shed. Those involving Christianity, those involving materialistic science, we're getting rid of all of that. We no longer are those things. And so there's an element of disintegration that I've tried to give the book an aura, misspelled acknowledgments as though this were a society that has forgotten how to spell Greek and Latin, let's say, and just barely retains it, strike through on my name, all kinds of fun formatting stuff like that. And because the poetry cycle is divided into two halves, and I'm going to read the first half here today, Poems of Genesis, and the second half is about Poems of Degeneration. And so it follows the kind of Spenglerian cycle of when, in the beginning of a civilization, the main motive for it is awe, A-W-E, awe and magnificence, and that's what inspires the civilization with new visions. Once the intellect comes in and then takes over, the disintegration process begins as the intellect begins analyzing, deconstructing, and discarding the signifiers of the civilization that were built during the cycle of Genesis. And so this is also a time, let's say, before there was any punctuation or capitalization, something like that. And I've made it look as though the table of contents were crawling like a living thing across the pages from left to right. It's crawling. I haven't finished the page numbers yet. That's why there are none on the table of contents yet. I've misspelled forward, and then there's some breaks as I read. I'll read the forward. The present volume is a retrospective of 3 decades of my poetry, some of it going all the way back to my college years at Arizona State University in the late 80s. The inception of the collection I owe to the enthusiasm of the hypermodern artist Mary Church, with whom I was romantically involved during the years 2016 to 2019. She was the first person to whom I ever read these poems aloud, and her enthusiasm for them was infectious. Mary then became the presiding muse over 6 collections of my poetry, including Archai, Gravity Girl, Thanatos, Orpheus in the World Interior, and Gilgamesh Redux, all now available on Amazon. The two of us had specifically intended the present collection as a collaboration for which she would draw the images, but alas, she had only drawn images for 3 poems, Centaur, Autumn Leaf, and When the Moon Was Gigantic, in late 2016, before our romantic relationship hit turbulence and we split up temporarily. It was always off again, on again. The intimate details of our relationship are fully recounted, uncensored, in the autobiography of John David Ebert, which I'm in the process. It's not available yet. I'm in the process of republishing it and adding a second volume to it. Thus, Mary Church was the intended co-author of this collection from its inception, and the manuscript has languished in obscurity in the electronic ether regions of my laptop ever since. I have unearthed the collection and added Mary's artwork to each of the poems as an illustration, as was her original intention. Together with the newly illustrated edition of Gravity Girl and also Orpheus in the World Interior are now available on Amazon. Hardcover, super res art, and everything. 2 collections represent the unveiling of the amazing art of Mary Church to the general public for the first time. Mary tragically committed suicide at the age of 28 in January of 2019, but the legacy of the art that she has left behind her is only just now awakening to the light of day. It has a long and fantastic journey ahead of it. This is for you. Okay. Preface, the cycle. Civilization begins in wonder and awe. The visions of the planets crawling across the ebony sky, the descent of gods from the heavens who come down to take up their dwellings at the tops of ziggurats, the building of the pyramids, the raising of the cathedrals with their transformation of the metaphysics of light into the jeweled phenomenon of the precious stones of the New Jerusalem. In every single case, it is wonder that is the motivating principle that brings new civilizations into being. But the vision that brings the civilization into being, alas, is mortal and eventually dies out, as the inspiring idea is depleted through the process of incarnating it repeatedly in art, science, music, literature, etc. The society loses touch with the vision and ends by becoming a practical affair of engineering achievements and technological wonders. Dull things, in other words. Hence, the movement from Zeus, Apollo, and Athena to the degeneration of the Colosseum, the Roman aqueducts, and the huge forums that function as technological supplements and replacements for the beauty and majesty of the early gods. And when that inspiration finally loses touch with the spark that set the initial flame, the flame sputters and dies out, and it cannot be revived. This was the informing idea of Oswald Spengler's 1918 book, The Decline of the West, which Spengler had inherited from Goethe, who before him had taken it from Vico, while Vico borrowed it from Hesiod. In India, the same idea is there articulated as the doctrine of the great Mahayugas, declining down from the Krita, Trita, and Dvapara yugas into the Kali Yuga. No golden age lasts. They all give way to silver, bronze, and finally iron ages, or Kali Yugas, in which technological substitutes are implemented for the loss of the original vision. Karl Jaspers, in his 1949 book, The Origin and Goal of History, saw the entire process unfolding in two stages, or what he called breathings. In the first stage, that of multiple breaths, as it were, everything was local. The Promethean age, as he termed it, was based upon the domestication of fire, the evolution of language, and the discovery of tools, an age long since vanished with the termination of the Upper Paleolithic. There followed the mythical age of the high civilizations of Sumer and Egypt, when the gods were instituted by the state, and the individual was entirely subordinate to both state and god. Then came what he famously called the Axial Age, lasting from about 800 BC to 200 BC, in which there spread in revolt against the first generation of high civilization backed by the state an individual vision quest based upon the teaching of self-salvation, as articulated by prophets like Yajnavalkya, the Buddha, Parshvanatha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Pythagoras. Jaspers saw this stage eventually giving way to the decadence of Heidegger's modern age of enframing, in which technology covers the entire planet like a dome and seeks to store all of its energies as a standing reserve on demand for future use as necessary. But then Jaspers saw a second great breathing, as he called it, forming in the 20th century that was not local at all, but rather global in extent, in which a single breath taken by humanity as a whole would lead to the rebirth of a new Promethean age of technical wonders. The goal of history, as Jaspers saw it, was the creation of a single humanity upon the earth. The vision of Jaspers, a pupil of Heidegger, is a linear one that sees a telos unfolding throughout history, but it is not a comfortable fit with Spengler's vision of the shift from Kultur to Zivilisation that he saw as the morphology of all civilizations. Each one for him began with lyrical wonder, a sort of astonished gaze at the phenomena of the world, much like Heidegger's idea of the Greek notion of being as phusis, in which forms mysteriously unconcealed themselves, flashed forth, and disappeared. Each civilization, as Spengler saw it, ended with science and technology attempting to replace that originating sense of wonder with the supplement of applied engineering and pragmatics. I have structured the following collection of poems in accordance with Spengler's cycle, dividing the first half into poems of Genesis, filled with a sense of wonder and awe at the mysteries of the world as a revelation unto itself. In the second half, poems of degeneration, the mystery is gone, and technology has taken over, and framing and blasting the world with technological substitutes. In the first cycle, living forms, stars, and atoms are made by gods, which constitute a powerful revelation of their informing energies. In the second cycle, technology attempts to appropriate the powers of these gods by stealing their creative abilities and substituting them with analogs in the form of genetic engineering, splitting the atom, and technical wastage of the planet, what I've called in my novel, Every Angel is Terrifying, monstrous technologies. I will not rule out the vision of Jaspers, however, to the effect that globalization is making one world out of us all and re-beginning the Promethean age anew. It is very possible that technology itself is now becoming analogous to Arnold Toynbee's idea of the decayed Hellenic world as the chrysalis from out of which Christianity came to bloom, for perhaps technology, in similar fashion, is now becoming the chrysalis for the emergence of a new planetary spirituality that will be reborn through its skeletal frame. It is a tempting thought to see the present age as pregnant with this new vision, a vital antidote to the decadent and degenerate world horizon that is currently ruled by technics in the form of psychopharmaceuticals, genetic engineering, and monstrous forms of physics. So without further ado, let the poems speak for themselves. Poems of Genesis. Gods. There was a time once when poets sitting on cracked marble urns invoked the muses, or when the angel whispered into Matthew's ear the tale of a man who came to earth as a god. Even Milton's Holy Spirit hovered like a dove upon the vast abyss and madest it pregnant. Though I make no such pretense to an invocation here, the poems that follow in the present cycle are full of gods, and that should be enough. When the moon was gigantic. In those days, volcanoes ruptured the earth, an accordion of rippling stone where cataracts of glowing magma striped the ground with ribbons of liquid rock. During the daytime, clouds of ash were thick enough to erase the young sun from an old sky that was only then changing from salmon pink to an aquatic blue. The moon rolled slowly across the night, so close to the earth that it seemed you could reach up and touch it. Vanilla neon. Enormous fern trees erupted from the ground, and huge green and gold dragonflies swarmed in the air, and wet red creatures with 4 legs that had only just wandered from azure seas were laying their eggs out of the water to be safe from predators, because one day out of one of those eggs would hatch a tiny pink animal that would awaken with gods sleeping in its neurons. And this poem, Kentauros, was one of Mary's favorites in the collection, and when I lived with her for a couple of months in Florida, I watched her draw this illustration, so that there's only a couple of actual illustrations that she drew specifically for the book. The rest of the artwork is not to be regarded as mere illustrations. They have their own independent existence from these poems. They're accompaniments to the poems, with the exception of this one and one other. It was not possible, but one afternoon they were digging, and they found the skeleton of a centaur. In the hot, dry, dusty air, they swept the dirt from the bones, astonished as they examined the vertebrae, which dissolved and fused with the backbone of a horse. For a while they simply stood there, and no one knew what to say, and the empty, scared faces of the archaeologists stared at one another, aghast. But after a debate that lasted all afternoon, they came to a resolution and buried it again. No one was ever allowed to speak of it, and they all agreed that it had somehow been a mistake of perception. Meanwhile, the bones of the centaur slumbered beneath the dirt and returned to the earth's memory, where it dreamed of an age of gods with legs like serpents and men with the hooves of horses. Credo. I think I wrote this. Was one of my earliest poems. I think I wrote this one right out of college. I believe there is one God who burns through everything that exists. The first men who realized this cut holes into the earth for their dead, hoping their fish-wide eyes would open once more like portals to another world. They set up skulls in the pink evening air and danced beneath the carnal sun, wearing the skins of dead animals, while the fire blazed from a mammoth bone hut behind them. At night, they gazed up at the ancient sky with its zoomorphic circle, wondering where their dead had gone, for they knew their souls had ascended to the dark vault of the heavens, where they burned among the stars. Very romantic, these early poems. When I was just coming out of college and I had a completely romantic worldview. Lilith. It went on like that for many years, cutting rows into the ground with a stone tied to a stick, planting seeds and watching them grow. His house was made out of stone blocks, stacked to form a dome like an igloo, with dusty sunlight pouring in from the always open front entrance. And the small bed in the corner, cut from the skins of gazelles, was already dirty and stained. There was never enough to eat. Years went by like that. and more years. The worst part of it was that sometimes he could see processions of angels striding over the arched green hills, thin giant figures radiating light and walking upright on their hind legs, carrying posts and poles and banners, and they never said a word to him. They didn't even know he existed. Nobody knew. Inside his head, he could only think, "You didn't say it would be like this." But there was no response because there never was any response. One day a panther stuck its head into the entrance while he was sleeping. He heard its distinct snuffling, awoke quickly, and threw a stone at it. It went away. Years went by. There was a river not far from his house, and each day he would go there to bathe, and each day on his way back he looked at the green plants in the earth, and yearned, and yearned. But then something strange happened. One morning he awoke with a pain in his side, and when he pulled away the animal skin there, it was a pulsing, throbbing orifice, through which some kind of small creature was presently making its way out. It was gray, but shaped like he was, and he watched in horror as the wet thing that came out of him gurgled as it drew its first breath. He put the creature inside a wooden box that he had made, but soon it grew too large for the box, so he had to make another larger box. The creature was like him as it grew over the next few days, rapidly shedding its skin each time. Soon it was regarding him from the corner of the stone house with wary brown eyes. It looked like him, but it wasn't like him. Something was missing from between its legs, and its chest was soft. It kept growing. Soon it was larger than he was, standing over him, demanding food from the garden. He watched it grow scales around its feet, which slowly turned into the talons of a bird. Wings sprouted from its back, and it could not speak to him except in grunts. Then one day it flew away. There she goes, Lilith. Bad soil. Oh, this is another one of my early romantic poems. Dreams grow like flowers from out of the abysses within us. At one time, gods grew like dreams from out of the brown earth, where people built their stone huts and erected their mud brick walls lined with the skulls of dead ancestors. Priests ascended the steps of their ziggurats to meet the elusive gods and waited, watching the stars for their descent. But when the soil is bad, nothing grows, not even gods. Desert rainstorm. Rainstorm over the desert. In the gray distance, maroon-colored clouds. Rain coming down in glistening silver streams over jagged obsidian-blade mountains, while copper flashes boom silently over the dark hills, where thin trails of cattle can be seen lacerating them like scars, and steel pylons bearing enormous cables walk like giants. Now I've used the Old English spelling for phantom fish, and I believe it's pronounced phantoma fish. The desert was ancient. Its dried yellow hills still remember the great oceans which had once covered it. The skeletons of tiny phantom fish were pressed into the sandstone and basalt rocks of its sedimentary strata, and the mountains rose and fell with time like huge slumbering behemoths. The fish skeletons were memories of deep blue-green seas cut with sun shadows fanning out through the depths. Before the change came, when the fins grew longer and the swim bladder became lungs, because the fish knew that the future lay in the brown soils on the land, where the green trees had already pulled themselves out of the water, foreseeing the coming of life on land. Now it could take gulps of air and make its way with its flippers to a muddy little tide pool where a fragment of sun lay gleaming as it crawled into the future. But the fish inside the rock could only remember all of this magnificence as it dreamed, and the mountain crawled slowly over the umber desert, carrying hordes of dead fish inside of it. And this is a painting that Mary Church did in high school, or drawing rather, it's in one of her sketchbooks, which I'll be republishing all 4 of her sketchbooks before too long here. The Birth of a God, another one of my college poems. At the time, I believe Robinson Jeffers was my favorite poet, and you can, for those of you who have read him, you can sort of sense his presence. Inside the depths of a cell, there is a tiny mind at work, shaping proteins to bind clusters into living organs. This same little mind builds gods in the womb of a man's mind, just the way it grows dreams in our nightly theater, and as an embryo in its mother womb is brought softly into form by the same laws which have shaped the planets in their molds of curved space, so too, somewhere upon this earth, there waits the embryo of a god, resting in the mother plasma of a man's mind. Marsyas in denim. There's another one Church drew in her college or rather high school sketchbooks actually. No God ever consoled you. Not in the beginning anyway. Not when it was first starting. Instead, you became the God. And the pain as it was finishing was searing, as the flesh was peeled from your ribs in long, thin, pink strips of meat. Marsyas in denim, standing in the wash of an ivory-colored streetlight. Deserted meal. Silver fish on a ceramic plate. Gold sunlight from the late afternoon raining in through the dirty window strikes the fish body with silver luminescence, and after a time the light turns a pale copper as the sun melts like a candle on the horizon. You have seen this before, eternity in a passing moment, and now you are unable to finish your meal. At night, alone with the wine, you watch through the window as the slim white disk of the moon passes out of the womb of the earth, growing larger and brighter until finally a great burning moon floats up into the black sky, perfectly centered in the window. You have seen this too before, you think, as you pour yourself another glass of wine, light a cigarette, and have a long, lonely conversation with the moon. Coyome. This is called coyotes, but this is the Nahuatl word plural for coyotes. Coyome. Dim and distant, you can hear the coyotes howling out of the deep recesses of the night somewhere. The sound of a speeding motorcycle, yellow sodium painting the night vanilla, faded. The stars burning as they always have, with nothing to say to you, but you have your loneliness in the night. Metamorphosa, and this is the German word for metamorphosis, since this is an allusion to Goethe's plant metamorphosis. Consider the seed. An ancient force has compressed a green world of cells bound together by a common image of the whole in each part. But all it takes is a flicker of moist brown earth power like lightning in a storm-cracked sky to awaken something. Dark juices are then flowing, and slow forces are working to split the shell from within. Warm sunlight erupts through the vesicles as cell upon cell in joyful unison pushes down the moisture-seeking roots and upwards the stem to unfold a leaf. Gold fire from the blue dome above explodes inside, and 1,000 cells joined together then form petals the color of red wine. Steinerian plant. A vertical axis connects the earth to the sun and draws the plant from the ground. It grows and mirrors the spiraling planets above. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the sun pull it upward to form the flower, while Mercury, Venus, and the moon draw it downwards into the earth. An invisible etheric cocoon surrounds the flower, a cocoon which soaks up sun forces and radiates them down to the plant ego at the earth's core. Thus the plant aligns the sun with the earth. That is how the world looks through the mind of a mystic. Childhood. There were orange trees everywhere. We would cut them open and their pulp would get beneath our fingernails like white clay. We would run through the sprinklers and Mother would set out a jar of dark gold tea to bake in the sun. It was so hot that the heat would transform approaching cars into gray liquid ghosts. During the summer monsoons, the sun would disappear behind floating, oily clouds, and lightning would go off like flash bulbs as the rains would transform the pavement into glossy black sheets. The next day, earthworms would cover the driveway, and I would have to be careful not to step on them. The sun would dry them out, all cracked and frail. The buzzing of the cicadas would make the sun sound like it was plugged in. Father was a ghost. A glass of clear gold liquid always in his hand as he designed his rockets. Mother sat in front of the television, her face painted a faint, squirming blue. Men would often come by to visit Father with shiny black suitcases and huge manila envelopes. Their cigarette smoke would stain the air a light vanilla brown as they sat around the kitchen table talking and sometimes shouting. I would twirl my baton and think that someday I would like to ride in a rocket too. This is a kind of German expressionist style painting in one of Mary Church's high school sketchbooks. She was quite precocious with her art. And this is the other one that I sat with her and watched her draw. Her illustration for this poem, which she loved, Autumn Leaf. Somewhere in the late afternoon, as the red sun lay burning in the trees, the wind blew through the field that I was standing in, and I paused to pick up a dead thing, an orange autumn leaf which had blown past me. I held it in my palm, a piece of the past gone brittle as the shell of a cicada. Then I realized that what I was holding contained within itself a whole universe of pulsing atoms, not dead at all, but merely waiting for another form somewhere else, in another field perhaps, or another life. Some of these very same atoms may stand in another field someday, beholding the ruined miniature cathedral of another dead leaf. But isn't the universe like that? Gigantic to us, but in the hand of a god no more than a leaf. A universe of burning suns to be held in the palm in the late afternoon, and then discarded as the wind blows among the trees of the dawning evening. Vanished people. There were many people here once. Now they have all gone away. Leaves jitter a dance macabre. Tiny skeletons upon the sidewalk. Dream poem. If a god can become a man, and a seed can become a flower, then why should we be astonished that in our dreams a man can become a butterfly? Beautiful kind of dreamlike landscape there that she drew in her high school sketchbooks. Another high school sketchbook drawing, which is quite brilliant when you look at it. It's a drawing of an eye, but she's transformed the iris into a planet. So something cosmic is going on inside that eye. Miracles. Think of all the fury and violence that attends the birth of a star. A great burning furnace soaking up energy from the abysses of black space and then pouring forth a fountain of flame. Such must have been the agonies attending the birth of a god when men lay writhing with pregnant skulls full of new beings. For at one time long ago, such miracles occurred as the birth of a god or the creation of a star. Nietzsche. At times Nietzsche sounds hysterical, I admit. He signed his last letters Dionysus and the Crucified, but we must remember that his soul was warped by loneliness, sickness, and poverty. Too much, in other words, of too little. A fate that was like Van Gogh's, perhaps. Only Nietzsche did not cut off a piece of his ear and offer it to a terror-stricken prostitute. Instead, he sliced entire cartographies from his brain and made a clearing for the gods to come take him. Beauty. This is another one of my college poems. Probably the best of them. All things are full of beauty, yet all things live in sorrow. Consider a blade of grass that shivers alone in the calm evening air. Beyond it, hordes of gnats dance in the fading orange light while the late afternoon birds sing an elegy to the dying summer sun that rests for just a moment upon the edge of the world before plunging beneath it into shadow. All men are filled with fear, for they know what end awaits them. They arise out of the darkness and sing their songs beneath the sun, painting joy and loneliness across the world's canvas, love and lust, wine and cross, God and roses, so many minds like mirrors of silence held up to nothing. All things are beautiful, and yet all things are terrible, for all beings are part of God, and this magnificent universe its body, all the stars so many burning cells that make up its blood, and the cycles of the planets whirling in endless cosmic rhythm, the pulse of its beating heart. Even you and I are but two of its atoms, crawling on a dust grain, whirling in a wash of pale summer sunlight over the white surface of eternity. And then just a shotgun blast of beauty from one of Mary Church's last paintings when she was living in Hawaii. It's a Hawaiian landscape. Stunning. Ant poem. Shipwrecked ant on my lampshade, in a canvas full of dust, will never again use its body to carry food back to the hive, although it is becoming something after all, the world's tiniest mummy. It looks like I got to correct that. There's a few typos, things that need to be corrected. This is still under construction. Probably will be available for purchase on Amazon probably by Wednesday, I would say. In the evening. This is the very first poem I wrote, actually. This in high school. The sun rests a moment in the gray air, as though pausing to reflect upon all that has been done. The day's events drift away like so many ghosts of trees and men and mountains and flowers. It remembers nothing. But now comes the darkening of a different world, of yellow sodium pools spilling down on parked cars, with barking dogs in the quiet distance, and the mute hulks of shadowy houses lit only by the pale blue light of 1,000 television screens. Dead leaves clatter across the sidewalk. The sun has liquefied to a thin layer of burning gold on the horizon. A moment of silence, and it is evening. Not bad for a first poem. Not bad at all for a 16-year-old kid. Dream X-ray. What's inside a dream? Dark oceans full of bioluminescent forms and ancient energies more subtle than any hand or eye could know of. These forms are like radiant fish that glow in the sunless ocean depths where the sun's rays can never reach, so they make their own light out of burning cells and phosphorescent skin as they drift through our nightly theater. Where do they come from, these fish? Transubstantiation. If 1,000 tiny crosses with little Christs nailed to them punctured every cell of your body like viruses of the Logos, would it be considered an invasion or a transubstantiation? Orpheus poem. And this is the first of my Orpheus poems. I just published Orpheus and the World Interior, which was my first book about Mary Church and I and our relationship. This was sort of the seed of it. There came the day when something you said or something I said was left unfinished. Wait for me, you said, and I said, but I can't. And then one of us was gone. But you said, then I'll come find you. And the god smiled and opened the gate that led downwards, where you stood gazing into the abyss and stepped forward to begin. Long nights. The problem was, too many long nights spent alone, looking out the window at the streetlight, even longer nights pacing the floor when she wouldn't call, eating in cafes with the sound of trucks rumbling by on the interstate, the woman in the window looking out at you and wringing her hands over some unendurable loss, airport lounges where an endless stream of blurred pink faces passed you by, heedless of you and your wreckage, long drives through quiet desert roads where you would look out at the city from above, watching the orange ball of the sun liquefy beyond the distant humps of the mountains, the strange green shudder of the leaves in the sodium light on a windy autumn evening in November that made you feel alien and distant, the remnants of extinct love, scissors, torn pictures, gold liquid in clear glass bottles, nights spent wandering the front yard alone with a drink in your hand and nobody to talk to but the ancient dying stars, the strangely quiet hulks of the eerie houses across the street with their dim, unreachable occupants, quiet, dark, and alone. You had many conversations with God, but God wasn't even listening. Telephone pole. Telephone pole beside the road, leaning at an angle, with a tuft of yellowed grass at its base, just like a crucifix. Thousands of them across the city. So many crucifixions of electricity harnessed to perform the task of carrying words across wires. In the days of the Romans, Parthians were crucified along the roads, and the brittle shells of their corpses decorated the roads with festive colors of red, brown, green. But they did not conduct words from pole to pole, only silence and agony. Palm tree. Palm tree against a sky the color of oranges, a charcoal stencil above the suburban rooftops that rest in the gloom, vanilla and cream-colored triangles chopping into the edge of the horizon as the sky washes out to a pale pink-white mauve. And Florida has palm trees, so I was glad to find an image of hers. She painted this of her high school, Gibbs High School in Florida. Almost a perfect imitation of the style of an Edward Hopper painting. She was able to channel surf any style whatsoever through that took place through all of modernity and post-modernity. Osiris and Christ. A god who was cut to pieces and then sutured up again, except for his phallus, swallowed by a fish, he pronounced from the darkness of his throne judgments over the souls brought to him, where and when, why and how. But, wrapped in a linen shroud, it was all he could do to hold himself together so that the pieces would not slide apart again. There came then one day a god from the stars who walked among men, the Logos made flesh. At Cana he turned water into wine. At the Sea of Galilee he walked on water before an astonished band of fishermen, and he performed exorcisms which drove demons out of men and into herds of swine. Osiris was lord of the darkness, but Christ was lord over all. And he was born from the great fish of the Magnus Onus, the same fish that swallowed the genitals of Osiris. Do you think it is possible that without Christ, science, with its command over the physical world, would even exist? Without exorcisms, no psychiatry. Without walking on water, No Spanish galleons without the change of water into wine, no chemical elements. And without the transfiguration on the mount, no atom bomb. Kuan Yin. A bodhisattva with 1,000 arms to reach down into hell and save the damned from their fates. One day she saved the Dragon King's son when he was transformed into a fish and sold at market. She sent her servant to buy him back and released him. That is why she sits upon a dragon with 7 heads, which protects her at all times so that she may clone herself 1,000-fold to save all who need her. But one day, something failed in her, for there were not enough arms for Hiroshima and not enough dragon heads for Nagasaki. Making. Gods, it is true, like to make suns. They light up hydrogen in black space and then step back and watch it burn a hole into the dark. Then they forge billions of them into fiery spinning pinwheels called galaxies that go surging and crashing into each other, star into star with fiery incandescent burning, sending far-flung bits of dust debris chaos, dying like meteors into the cold darkness of infinite space. Gods make living forms, too. They set fire to proteins, amino acids, lipids, blood whirling, pulsing, pumping, and circulating, then step back to watch what crawls through the black mud and over the mossy green hills and through the emerald trees with teeth, fangs, claws, tearing each other to pieces. But then what is the birth of a son or a living form to you and I? We are made of fire and blood woven out of earth and sea, and we swarm over the earth, starlight burning in our veins. Come, my love, forget about the gods, for we will make forms of our own. We shall bring them out into space and set them into time, and then we shall leave them behind and return to the dark. Very prophetic, those lines there. Luminosity. One night I found myself walking beneath the streetlights while a soft breeze stirred the leaves that shuddered near the bulbs, which set them afire like tiny glittering sea creatures. The night was heavy and dark, but there was something even darker inside me, staining my insides with blackness. I walked with slow, uneven gait, disheveled and uncertain, though I thought that beyond the blackness must lie an even deeper stratum of light, made out of silvery phosphorescence, a light that was as difficult to find as the pearls hunted by the divers off the coast of Bahrain. But I knew it was there, down there, somewhere, and if I could find it, the light would surge through me like an electric current that would transform me into an eel of glowing effulgence that would outshine even the ancient dying stars in every cell of my body, that would light up the night with its own luminous radiance. Dawn. Turquoise lemon-yellow morning. The sun splits the cracked earth apart as it crawls from the dried mud of the ground below to stain the dawn sky with a pale wash of red the color of rust. Rain-wet streets with little pools of gleaming incandescence full of tiny, squirming suns. One foot dips down inside them and vanishes in a ripple of silver phosphenes. And so that's the first half of the cycle, this poems of wonder and awe, generation. And now we have the second half of the book. I'll read a few of them, and it's still under construction, just to give you a sense of what they're like. Poems of degeneration. I found a little drawing of hers where she wrote, "Where's my mind?" And it looks like his head is disintegrating, or at least his mind. Yeah, and then so we have the realm of death, decay, and things coming apart. Everything that goes up must come down, gravitationally and biologically. Decay of the angel. Rilke knew it. Angels are not benign at all. They are huge and monstrous giants from behind the stars, with bat wings and heads shaped like a panther's. And if you were to be so misfortunate as to encounter one of them, the radiance alone would sear you blacker than a Hiroshima shadow, which deed they have never forgiven us for stealing a power that was theirs exclusively and not for the hands of some tiny homunculus crawling upon a blue and white moat, circling the ruins of an ancient star and dragging a dead moon behind it. Secrets. Tell me all the secrets, my love. You know the ones. Those that built the atom and the sun and the means for splitting them apart to release Kali from her tiny prison. The secret for shuffling the genes so that we may make men in our own image. The secret for building the body of the God that lives inside my head. The secret for connecting neurons with silicon and making biomorphic forms in vitrines full of green liquid. Whisper to me the language of chromosomes and mitotic spindles and base pairs, and then say to me that you and I shall not be dust in a wind-blown field where blackbirds gather on fences to wait for skulls. I want to know of living forms and how to make men into monsters. For you, my love, have all the secrets that I need to build this world on Earth. And then so we have, these are little snippets from the early rough draft version of Every Angel is Terrifying, which is about a girl whose father is a genetic engineer who creates the world's first human clone. So I won't read these here. These are just prose, sort of prose poetry, moving us into the degeneration period of artificial intelligence and creating biological forms. Peter. At first the teeth went, chipping away one by one. Then muscles, cartilage, nerves became visible as the skin wore away like an anatomic model. Even your cells did not survive this devastation, burning away in telophase, yet the body remained. Only now it was different, transformed, somehow, with elongated arms and thin spidery legs and a pink eyeless face. You even had a second pair of arms that grew from your back like strange membranous wings. At first you did not know what to do, but in time you realized how to use this new body, for the second arms had claws and could rend and cut, while the atrophied arms, the ape arms, had hung down limp and useless. And you knew then that this second body was not your own, but engineered for chaos by the makers who left you to die in a heap of debris, a mountain of yellow bones and scattered chunks of disused brown and gray organs. Then it came to you, the realization, slowly at first, but then dawning, that it was time to find your makers and kill them. Mining. Cloud shadows squirming across the broken earth where the ground, ruptured into pits of molten red tailings and burnt liquid metal, tracks veins of orange rivers across the swale and vast gorges filled with turquoise runoff from mines that have cracked open the brittle earth and collapsed sheets of lavender mountain into piles of disarticulated bone rubble. And the faint sun burns, a hollow orb, through dust clouds kicked up by yellow trucks that are slowly stripping away its skin. Chrome sky. Tiny brown pools left behind by the storm, nesting in frozen squares and strips of the flat, silent earth, scarred by lines more rigid than those of Nazca, bisecting tan and copper squares with caramel-colored roads etched into the hillsides, and a sky the color of faded chrome painted over the desert. I got a few little mistakes that I still have to correct. Okay. City. I think this is one of Mary Church's best paintings. It's absolutely extraordinary. And her mother told me that she tried to destroy it. She hid it under the couch from her. City. Passages. Frozen milk faces gleaming in strips of iconic fluorescence. Faces without mouths, smooth pink flesh, neon vortices spiraling red, blue, hot pink, underground slabs of black concrete spray painted in red graffiti, yellow incandescence pouring down over streetlight pools of soft human flesh, crumbling concrete overpass, green moss, chunks of rubble, plastic shoes, rubber hands, gleaming rivers of chromium exhaust, chaotic currents of steam rising from black manhole covers, shuddering asphalt, subways riding the night music in broken syncopation, burnt-out cigarettes and ashtrays spilling dark soot-stained fingers, broken cafes under heavy iron lattices, beneath pale vanilla light swimming in post-war radiation, mutated flesh hanging on elongated spinal columns, ribs made visible, hungry yellow teeth seeking food from soft white flesh. This is how they eat each other. They gathered together. They gathered together in council, and they said the time would come when men would no longer be necessary, and when one fine day that time would come, they would all descend as scaly blue creatures with long leathery wings and ivory yellow teeth drooling saliva that would tear men into pieces. And it's interesting because I had written this poem long before I ever found out she had a painting that matches it almost perfectly, and that's a high school painting. Dead men. There they lay on the hill in the rain. Round, barrow-shaped dirt hills full of dead men. The earth was so soft that when you stepped in it, you thought your foot might sink into one of the skulls, or gently cave in the ribcage of some dead man with all his memories, still drifting like a fog through his head, As the gray rain continued to pour down on the dead men surrounded by a field of pine trees, you looked at the sign somebody had painted that said, "Dead Men," and you wondered who they were and what might have killed them. And then suddenly the thought came to you very quickly, you didn't belong there. These were dead men, and they didn't like to be disturbed. And before one of them could begin to stir and awaken, pushing his mound of dirt about as he writhed his way up through it, you decided very quickly that it was time to get back in your car and go. That poem is actually based on a real experience that I had up in northern Arizona, of this field of just dead men, and these graves were humps, and the earth was really soft, and it spooked me out. And so you can see where the drift of the cycle is headed for apocalypse. Cities of the plain, eggs of God, born out of the earth, ringed by empty bronze hills and withered palms, yellow dust everywhere nearby a sun-painted river, over which fishing boats drift in the unmoving air, their occupants unaccounted for. At just the right moment, the gold eye of the sun fades behind a layer of iron gray clouds, and the eggs, 4 of them, hatch, and 4 gods awaken from out of the pink mucus and set forth into the world, their missions inscribed into their misshapen brains. Wings sprout from their crimson spines and carry them over the quiet brown land, away from each other and toward the cities of men. The 4 horsemen. This is the last one I'll read. For those of you who want to buy this book when it comes out in about a week, and then you can read the rest of the poems. It'll be about a third of them that I'm not going to read on here. Imagine for a moment the Earth in outer space, a viewpoint from, say, somewhere in the exosphere, a slowly spinning blue-white globe with a faint yellow haze around it. Then imagine, if you will, the dark side of the Earth turning toward you with thousands of tiny lights scattered like fairy dust across its surface, softly glowing. Now imagine those lights going out, simply turning off in large masses, leaving behind huge swathes of darkness in their wake. The satellites in the exosphere around you sputtering their signals a moment longer, then simply dying out. Hunks of lifeless metal, stuck in dead orbits forever. And then something you hadn't noticed before. Hordes of shadows surrounding the Earth by the thousands, whispering among themselves, and one by one, descending toward the darkened sphere. And then at that precise moment, you would realize it had begun. All right, that's all I'm going to read from These Things We No Longer Are, which is what I guess it's the 5th book to be published by our new press, Ikonic Books. And I have done a GoFundMe for Ikonic Books. We want to create a full-blown press, and that's going to require resources and funds. So I'll put the link below for the GoFundMe site if you want to contribute to. It's me and my brother running the show so far, with Mary Church helping, of course, from the astral plane. So it's actually a trio of us working so far. I also do astrology readings. Keep in mind, those will clarify whatever situation you're in that needs clarification. All right, that's it.